Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today for a conversation with Dr. Peter Levine and Dr. Rae Johnson on an autobiography of trauma. I'm Izzy Angus. I am the Public Events Manager for California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. We are calling in and watching this conversation from all over the world, but as a representative of CIIS, I want to honor and acknowledge our gratitude and our debt to the Ramaytush Ohlone people for the unceded ancestral lands on which our campus sits, and for being the continual caretakers and stewards of Yelamu. Yelamu being the Ramaytush word for both the people and the territory of the San Francisco Peninsula. This acknowledgement is the least that we can do, and it is a very first step in cultivating a deeper relationship with Indigenous tribes, people, and organizations where we live. I invite you to call out in the chat where you're calling in from and perhaps who the Indigenous caretakers are of the lands where you live. If you are early in your journey, you're not sure, and would like a starting resource, I recommend the website native-land.ca. Before we start, I want to go over a few general tips and troubleshooting items. We will have a Q&A after the conversation tonight, so please submit your questions at any time using our anonymous web form, which is linked in the event description below this video. Our presenters will answer questions from that form, and we will try to get to as many as we have time for. We also have automatically generated captions for this event, which you can toggle on and off using the closed captioning button in YouTube. Also, as you see, chat is enabled during this event, but please note that it is not being moderated and our presenters cannot see the chat. If you choose to participate in chat, please be respectful and avoid language that could be offensive or insensitive to others. Chat is not required to fully experience the event, and you can turn the chat off at any time, and we actually encourage you to do so if you find that it is negatively impacting your experience in any way. If you're having issues with your audio or video, we suggest that you first start by refreshing the page, and then if you still have issues, try adjusting your video settings from within YouTube. Now, let me first introduce our presenters, and then we'll get right to the conversation. Dr. Rae Johnson is a board-certified coach, somatic movement therapist, and scholar activist working at the intersections of embodiment and social justice. Currently a professor of somatic psychology at California Institute of Integral Studies, Rae has held leadership roles in several somatic psychology graduate programs over the past 2 decades. More recently, they played a key role in developing the first embodied social justice certificate, an online program that brought together hundreds of thought leaders, practitioners, and community change agents to help shape the emerging field of embodied social justice. Rae is the author of several books, including Embodied Social Justice and Embodied Activism. Dr. Peter A. Levine is the developer of Somatic Experiencing, a naturalistic and neurobiological approach to healing trauma. He holds doctorates in both biophysics and psychology. He is the founder and president of the Argos Institute for Somatic Education and the founder and advisor for Somatic Experiencing International. Dr. Levine is the author of several best-selling books on trauma, including Waking the Tiger, Healing Trauma, and his most recent book, An Autobiography of Trauma, A Healing Journey. He has received Lifetime Achievement Awards from Psychotherapy Networker and from the U.S. Association for Body-Oriented Psychotherapy. He continues to teach trauma healing workshops internationally. You can learn more about Dr. Levine at somaticexperiencing.com. And now it is my absolute pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Johnson and Dr. Levine.
Thanks for the intro. Okay. So I follow
Thanks.
you. Whoops.
Yep, you follow me. Here we go. Thank you so much for the introductions, Izzy and Peter. It's such a pleasure to be able to have a conversation with you. I'm really looking forward to it. I thought I would start us off with a question, really maybe perhaps more about the field of somatics, because I'm guessing that many folks on the call today might know you best as a trauma expert.
Yeah.
Right? But you've really been deeply immersed in the world of somatics since early in your career.
Yes.
Right? And we've been talking, as you know, about the mainstreaming of somatics for a long time in the field, right? But these days it feels like it might actually be happening. And it's not just psychology anymore, right? It's
No.
neuroscientists,
Yeah.
sociologists, business leaders. They're all talking about the body. Yeah.
Yes. What do you know about that? Is that interesting, huh? Who would have thought?
Who would have thought? And also about time,
Yeah. And yes.
right?
Mhm.
Do you have a sense? I mean, looking sort of over the long arc of your own career and your own immersion in this field, why do you think the body's having a moment right now?
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. You know, I think when I began teaching in the 70s, early 70s,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, people were saying things about this, but this is to actually have people feel their bodies was a
Mm.
dangerous thing, and
Yeah.
that people should stay away from me because of the danger of actually feeling things in their bodies. So,
Yes.
but now, okay, so that was in the 70s, but now flash forward, you know, you mentioned that the last Lifetime Achievement Award was from the Psychotherapy
Right.
Networker.
Right.
And, you know, I would say it's mainstream in some ways, but it's also
Hmm.
more open-minded than some of the other organizations like the APA.
Right.
So anyhow, uh, when they were giving me the award, they have a magazine that comes out every 3 or 4 months, something like that. So
Hmm.
this was to, I guess, to usher in the award.
Yeah.
And there was a picture on the cover, you know, one of those puzzles where you have 1,000 pieces and you have to put all the pieces together.
Hmm.
So it had that kind of a diagram there, a person there,
Yeah.
and and there was one piece of the puzzle that was missing,
Mm. Hmm.
and the caption was the missing piece. The missing
Yeah.
piece is what else? It's the body.
Right.
So I think
Right.
in a way, I wouldn't say it's universally recognized, but it's certainly
Right.
no longer in the fringe. And as you mentioned, that people from many different disciplines, from
Hmm.
neuroscience, business, and so forth, are realizing how vitally important embodiment is and how, as a society, that we're so very disembodied, not just because of trauma, but because of the way our culture has come, I mean, maybe even from the time of Descartes, when he said,
Hmm.
I where I am. That,
Right.
that was ridiculous. But then there was a person around the same time as he, which was in the mid 1600s, Blaise Pascal, who was also a philosopher.
Hmm.
And then when Descartes said this, he wrote him a letter and said, Mr. Descartes, I cannot forgive you. You have just, I don't want to say the word, but you've just messed up. And
Hmm.
um, he said, but then he said, the body has its reasons in this
Yes.
letter to Descartes. The body has its reasons, the body has its reasons which reason cannot reason, or the heart has its reasons that reason cannot reason.
Yes.
So really at that very, you know, that turning point, and I think we're still kind of struggling as a society of really even what does it mean to be embodied, to be disembodied.
Hmm. Right.
And I came across it in working with trauma because trauma is the ultimate disembodying experience,
Right.
you know. And but again, as we we're talking, it's so much bigger than that, and it's so much really changing in the zeitgeist. And I think this is well, it's no turning back from there.
Hmm. So that all of those moments over the last, at least in my professional career, over the last 30 or 40 years, where we thought maybe this was the moment.
Yeah,
What I'm
right.
right, right. What I'm hearing from you is no, actually, this might really be it, and that perhaps all of the support that we're getting from the other disciplines, the the hard sciences, I think in
Sure.
some ways, I think it would be a mistake to equate the neuroscientific understanding of embodiment with somatics,
Right.
but it's given us a huge amount of
Yeah.
legitimization
Yeah. Yeah.
in
You
other
know,
areas.
I was some time ago, I was reading this, it was an article,
Mm.
and um, it, it was a group talking about, how did they put it? That people, the title was Interoceptive Awareness, blah, 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 blah.
Yep.
And so they said, well, if a person can feel their heartbeat, then they're going to be much more healthy, not only
Yes.
psychologically, emotionally, but physically.
Right.
Now, that's one thing that when we work in somatic experiencing, people make contact with hundreds of different sensations,
Yes.
not just heartbeat.
Right.
That's one of many, 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 many. But
Yeah.
again, you see where things are starting to try to go in that direction, but they do have a ways to go.
Right. They're starting with little small pieces of, oh,
Yeah,
let's look at the correlation between the capacity to feel your heartbeat and other positive health outcomes.
exactly. And so
Whereas,
I
yeah.
welcome, of course, I welcome that. But
Yes.
again, it's just the beginning. It's just the edge of this.
Right. Right. That there isn't, I think in many ways, we still don't have an understanding in other disciplines and in among the general public about how there's a sensual richness of the world that opens up to us
Right.
that
I like,
changes everything.
yeah, richness. And
Mhm.
when we are interoceptively connected, we
Yes.
are in contact with this richness,
Yeah.
with this vast part of the universe.
Right. That when we're talking about somatic awareness, we're not just talking about what are you feeling inside your body, that there are in those processes, this whole relational realm and
Yeah.
spiritual realm
Yes.
that opens up. And that actually prompts me to another question that I had for you. Was a little farther along down the line, but now that we're talking about it, I'd like to ask it. So many religious and spiritual traditions historically and cross-culturally have really emphasized what we might describe as transcendence over the body.
Yeah.
Right. Right. That the route to enlightenment is to somehow transcend the body.
Yeah.
How
Big
do
mistake.
you reconcile that? Because it's really clear in your book that for
Yeah.
you, embodiment and spirituality are deeply embedded in one another.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. Absolutely. I've given talks or done presentations or workshops for
Yeah.
some of the different meditation centers,
Mm-hmm.
the US and in Europe.
Yeah.
And I happened to be presenting at a conference I think in California, in San Diego.
Yeah.
And Rick Hansen was
Mm-hmm.
one of the speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't know I was in the audience. And I didn't, I was in the very back.
Right.
And he talked about mindfulness.
Uh-huh.
And he said, but if that's the only place we're going, that we're really making a big mistake.
Yeah.
Then he nominated me for the Nobel Prize to bring embodiment. I know that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
again, I think it's a recognition that you can't transcend the body. I mean, I suppose when we die, that's a different thing.
Right.
But really, how central the body is as an organizing force in our life.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
if we miss that, we're really missing a big part of life.
Mm-hmm.
One of the places that I was invited by Thich Nhat Hanh, this was some years ago, to
Yeah.
teach at the Plum Village,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
France. And I really liked what he was doing.
Yeah.
So most of the time they would start with walking meditation.
Of course.
And that is an embodied form of meditation,
Absolutely.
for sure. And then afterwards, groups would meet in groups of like 12 or 15 people,
Mm-hmm.
like underneath one of the plum trees in
Yes.
Plum.
Yeah.
And they would share with each other their experience.
Mm.
And one of the things with embodiment is that we really connect to that social instinct
Yes.
to be with others. So I think
Yes.
it was wonderful that he was maintaining that and gave people the opportunity to make social engagement and to talk about the things that were changing in their experience in the
Yeah.
patient. So I mean, it's pretty clear to me that most of the people I know, Jack Cornfield
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
his organization, really good friend. Actually, he wrote a lovely thing about the book, but
Yes.
and he, they're really shifting in I forget the name of their organization, and but of really really saying what they talk about the bliss bypass that you get
Yes.
where you transcend the body and you're in bliss.
Hmm.
And of course,
Yeah.
that's where you want to go. Who wouldn't want to go there? But then the
Right.
shadow gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the lack of the body gets greater and greater and greater. So
Hmm.
you can try to avoid it, but you can't run away. It will follow you and it will bite you when we don't have that connection, and
Yes.
becomes put out in the shadow realm away from us, and we suffer from that.
Right. Right. That there was this impulse to avoid the messiness and the complications and um, the subtleties and the confusion that can arise by just embracing our physical sensations. But
You're right.
also, what I'm hearing you talk about is that there's a way in which we might make a connection between what gets spoken of as spiritual bypassing,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And somatic bypassing.
That's right. You can go in either. You can fail in either direction. Absolutely. No, that's completely correct. The after this book that I just published, the Autobiography of Trauma,
Yeah.
Healing. The next book that I'm starting to work on is titled Trauma and Spirituality, Resilience and
Mm,
Spirit.
yeah.
And a lot of that really is about embodied spirituality. I'm actually writing the book along with one of my Danish colleagues in
Okay.
Copenhagen.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
actually, in a couple of weeks, we'll be spending a week together, kind of really working on things to get
Hmm.
get it going. But yeah, you're right. If you're simply focusing on sensations, well, it can be boring. Um, but you're also missing important things
Yes.
in our feeling world, in our emotional world. And
Yeah.
sometimes people can use sensations as a way of getting away from emotions. Or at the same time, when people have habitual emotions that they're stuck with, they need to be able to find the sensations underlying those emotions and tease them apart.
Hmm.
So it's
Right.
it's a yeah, yeah,
That 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 really what we're looking for here is fluency across those realms, and not having to avoid certain territories, either sensation or emotion or social engagement
that's
or
right.
the social world or the spiritual world.
Yes, exactly. All of that to
Yeah.
develop kind of a global fluency. It's a good word you use, fluency.
Yeah.
How we can really get to enlist
Hmm.
language
Yes.
and take it where it takes us.
Yeah. Yeah.
We don't know where it's going to take us.
No. And that, I
Yeah,
think that may be part of the resistance for some folks.
yeah. It can be scary.
It can
It
be
can
a
be
little
scary.
scary. Yeah.
Yeah, when I started writing the Autobiography of Trauma,
Hmm.
I had no intentions of publishing it as a book. It
Okay.
was
Right.
simply as my own excavation, because
Hmm.
now at the age, I'm in my
Yeah.
80s,
Yeah.
and even if I have a very healthy, vibrant life, which I mostly do,
Hmm.
except jet lagged,
Yes.
um, still the number of years I have ahead of me are considerably less than the years from my conception to where I am right now.
Hmm. Right.
And so I really wanted to make this excavation and find the path that my life has taken and
Hmm.
look at some of the things that have shaped my life,
Yeah.
both positively and traumatically.
Yes. Yeah.
And so when I started to do this, it was more like a, what do you call it? Like a journaling.
Yeah.
It was just for my own use. It was scary to do it. I mean, really scary to do it.
Mhm.
And it took a lot, it took a lot of courage, really.
Yes.
But I made a commitment to myself that I would follow the truth, my truth, wherever it would lead.
Yep.
And so anyhow, when I was writing this again for myself, I had a very good friend, and she said, "Peter, aren't you going to publish this as a book?"
Mm.
And I said, "No way. It's
Right.
too delicate. It's
Personal.
too vulnerable. It's too personal,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm not sure I want people to know who I am beyond developing somatic experiencing, how it came about in my life."
Yeah.
And so she said, "Well, maybe please think about it, because I think it could really help people in their own journeys to write their own stories."
Yes.
And I said, when she said that, I mean, it's like my throat constricted. And I said, "Well, let me at least think about it." And she said, "Good, think about it." And in my life, when I've come to a decision point, a fork in the road, often a synchronicity or a dream, which is a form of synchronicity, comes to mind, and
Yeah.
it really informs my next steps.
Yes.
So when I was gestating the possibility of writing the book as a book, I had the following dream. And in the dream, I'm standing in front of a large field. And in my hands, I have manuscripts of, obviously, of some kind of a book, something like that.
Yeah.
And I look to the left and to the right, left, right. And clearly, I don't understand. I'm conflicted. I, I, I don't know what I should be doing. I don't know what my next step will be. So
Right.
in time of indecision,
Yeah.
this breeze came from behind me and took all of these pages and blew them out into the meadow,
Okay.
the land where they would land.
Mm-hmm.
And when I woke, I wrote down the dream. And in the middle of writing down the dream, I realized that the decision had already been made
Right.
by me, for me, by the
Yes.
dream.
Right.
And as I said, it was quite a challenge to write this as a book.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things when we were talking about embodiment, I really wanted to honor some of the people that were important figures in my life.
Yes, absolutely.
And so one of the chapters is called "The Four Most Important Women in My Life"
Mm-hmm.
and "The Four Most Important Men in My Life." And
Yes.
my friends, she said, "Oh, am I included?" I said, "Well, of course." But
Yes.
this is not just about about love relationships, but
Yeah.
wonderful mentors that I have somehow called to me, or they've called to me.
Mm-hmm.
When I came out to Berkeley doing my graduate work in
Yeah.
1964,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I I was completely disembodied. I mean, I really
Mm-hmm.
didn't know I didn't know I had a body, really, truth
Yeah.
be known.
Right.
And this friend of mine, Jack, he was at the Green Gulch Meditation Center
Yeah.
in County,
Yeah.
wonderful place. And there was a workshop being given by Charlotte Selvers and her husband, Charles Brooks.
Yes.
And so even though I wasn't a meditator there, he was able to get me to come.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this was the stupidest, most boring thing I ever did, truth.
Of course.
For example, we all picked up a stone and holding it in our hand,
Yeah.
and feel the weight and feel the texture and feel the temperature and feel what it feels like to have your hand on the rock and all of this. And this went
Yeah.
on and on and on and on, and
Yeah.
having us feel our feet touching the ground. I remember going, and I was coming in one direction, and the other direction was one of the monks.
Mm-hmm.
Said, "How was this workshop for you?" And he looked at me and he said, "Big headache."
Uh-huh.
At the end
Yeah.
of the day, Charlotte had us laying down on the
Mm-hmm.
floor in this wonderful church at the top of O'Farrell Street.
Yeah.
And to feel our breath coming in from our feet, into our groins, up into our chest, up into our heads,
Mm-hmm.
the opposite coming out.
Yeah.
And again, remember, I'm a scientist. I'm
Yes.
coming to do my doctoral work in hard science.
Yes. Yeah.
I know the feet don't breathe.
No. No,
There's
that's
no
not
way
how we do that.
maybe they smell, but they don't breathe.
Uh-huh.
So, however, when I came out from the church at the end of the day, it was a twilight, and I
Yes.
looked down out towards the Bay Bridge and
Yeah.
down to the lights in San Francisco, and it's like it was the most beautiful thing that I had ever seen. And I
Yeah.
realized it was there all the time, but I didn't see it.
Because you
So
had been asleep.
exactly, because I had been asleep.
Yes.
And that really turned the arc of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Another important person in my life, again, that I also wrote about
Yeah.
is Rolf, who developed the
Yes.
methodology of Rolfing. And it's not so much about the deep tissue, but that's
Mm-hmm.
an important part. But uh, but it's really about seeing the body as it is without filtering it through the mind. And the way this came about, she, uh, she called me the young man with a mop of hair and a bag of bones, because I was
Mm-hmm.
most of them were quite mesomorphic structures.
Yes. Uh-huh. And
Here I
then here
am.
you were an ectomorph.
That's right.
Yep.
And so anyhow, the way she would teach, she would have her model come in,
Mm-hmm.
she would talk about the body that as she saw it, and then she would work with
Yeah.
them. And then the next day, that same model would come in and she would continue working with that model.
Mm-hmm.
So after the first session, and people, I mean, people were terrified about her. I
Yes.
mean, like the
She
Iron
was a bit
Lady.
of a forbidding figure,
Oh,
and she was formidable.
but it's kind of interesting. For some reason, she really took me under her wing.
Mm.
And one time I was visiting her in Manhattan, in New York, where she lived.
Uh-huh.
And so she took me to this restaurant. It was a Jewish deli restaurant.
Yep.
And so we were eating, and she was going on about how lucky I was that she was taking me under her wing. And
Mm-hmm.
I agreed, that was completely true.
Yeah.
But then as we were leaving the restaurant, there was this Jewish couple sitting at a table, and they said to her, "Oh, you're so lucky, you have such a lovely grandson."
Ow.
So we had that kind of a playful
Mm-hmm.
relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyhow, when she was coming in to do the second hour,
Mm-hmm.
uh, everybody was scared because, if he asked about that, they would be terrified if they said the wrong thing. So at that time, there were only two Rolfers, and they were Peter Melchior and Jan Sultan, and they were living at Esalen. So we grabbed them, and if they would tell us what the second hour was about, we would buy as much wine or beers as they wanted. So there we are.
Okay. They were bribable.
Exactly, the bribe is right. So anyhow, the next day we come in, and Dr. Rolf has the person come up, and she says, "What do you see?" And so somebody says, "Well, we see the left malleolus is having the effect on the right shoulder."
Mhm.
And so she looked at him and said, "No, what do you see?" So then somebody else offered. They say, "Well, I see that there's a twisting in the pelvis and we have to work with this." And she said,
Right. Yeah.
"What do you see?" And around this time, one of my lab mates in the neurobiology lab where I was doing my doctorate,
Mm-hmm.
Earl Mayeri, he was doing his doctoral work at the marine biological labs in Bodega Bay.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
he was renting this wonderful, it was like a little house, but it was a garage, but it was fixed up to be, there was a gas heater and a bed.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he was done with his work, he bequeathed that to me.
Okay. Yeah.
So It went on Friday. As soon as I was done with my classes, I would run into my car and drive out and come to that. And there was a book, it's not this book, but there was a book that said the tide pools of Central California or Northern
Yes.
Central California.
Yeah.
And so I would go out and I would sit by the tide pools, and I couldn't see anything. I
Yeah.
looked, and I looked, and I couldn't see anything.
Yeah.
Finally, in frustration, I gave up and I just let my eyes glance out into the where the horizon
Yes.
was. And in that moment when I gave up trying and I was looking softly,
Yes, that soft gaze.
that soft gaze, all of a sudden everything in the tide pool started coming into activity and into life.
Ah.
And I was so excited. I looked quickly again, and again it disappeared. So when I finally gave up and just let it happen, I could see what I couldn't see when I was trying. And that's what I remembered when I was with Ida Rolf. And instead of trying to lock on with my eyes, I looked softly and
Yeah.
described what I saw and what I experienced. And I remember her saying, how come he's the only one who's making any sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is what we learned from her in many ways, is really to see from first principles. So the
Yeah.
work that I've done with Charlotte Selvers, and then continuing with Ida Rolf, and also a woman named Magda Proskauer, which
Yes.
most people don't know about.
Yes.
Yeah, she was another very important person in my life.
Absolutely. I was so happy to hear you write about Ida Rolf and Charlotte Selver. I teach and have taught over many years sort of the foundations of somatic psychology, where it comes from, and sort of who helped us understand, both from Eastern and Western and indigenous perspectives, who helped us understand some of these foundational principles. And I miss people talking about Charlotte Selver, for example.
Yeah.
So I was so pleased to see that in your book, and to hear you really not only just recognize who you'd learned from, but to share with your readers what it was that you learned, because those really fundamental essences, I think, are so important in building a body of work. So
Absolutely.
I have a question for you, because you've done this remarkable work of really reflecting back, noticing your own learning process over the decades, and identifying where those critical turning points were for you in your own learning development as a human being, but also as a professional, and what came into the development of somatic experiencing.
Right.
So now that you are in a position where you may be the age that I mean, in both Ida Rolf and Charlotte Selver lived to be a nice mature age as Charlotte Selver into her hundreds, right?
104. Yeah.
Exactly. So you're not there yet, but now that you're in a place where you have this opportunity to look back on your life,
That's right. Yeah.
what would you like your students to say that they learned from you?
Yeah. There's an important person that we haven't mentioned,
Yes.
and that's Chiron.
Okay, yeah.
And Chiron comes from Greek mythology,
Yes.
which was half animal, half man, which in itself is interesting, important.
Yeah.
But the way I understand it, it's the wounded healer.
Yes.
And those of us who work in the healing arts and the healing professions, we really need to we need to do our own work. Because if we don't, we really can't be there for the other.
Right. It's about the relationship, not the technique.
No.
Or not as much, right? We know this. We know
course.
this from the research. Yeah.
And so around the time when I was writing the book, or starting to write the the journal, I was starting to have some disturbing sensations and symptoms that were coming up for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked one of my students to be my guide. It was time that I needed to take a dose of my own medicine
Yeah.
and not go away from this and not deny this.
Right.
And one of the things that's important in somatic experiencing is we don't go right to the jugular vein of the
Not in the
trauma.
deep end. Right.
No, not at all. We gently touch into the periphery
Mm-hmm.
and to counter experiences. This is very different than a therapy, which was becoming very well known at the time, called prolonged exposure therapy.
Yes.
They had people relive their traumas over and over and over again to drain the swamps.
To extinguish it.
Exactly, somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, okay. So anyhow, in somatic experience, again, we really find ways to bring up our capacity, our resilience.
Yes. Yeah.
And when I was working with my student, my guide,
Mm-hmm.
came up, and around this time, my family was under extreme threat from the mafia.
Yes.
They threatened to kill us. And so it was a very difficult time in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
But anyhow, when I started working with my sensations, it went actually to a very interesting memory that I had when I was about 5 or 6.
Yes.
And it was my birthday.
Yeah.
And my parents must have come into my room when I was asleep, and they laid tracks from a model train set underneath my bed, out to the room, back,
Yeah.
and then into underneath again to the And to say I was thrilled would be an understatement.
Yeah.
I literally just filled with life. I jumped out of bed. I went over to the transformer so I could control the speed and make the horn go toot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And feeling that really fully in my body.
Yes. Just lit up.
Exactly. It's not the memory per se, but it's to embody that memory and to embody that positive memory experience.
Yes.
And then in doing that, we went to another memory. And because of the threat from the mafia, basically they told my father that if he testified against them, which he was called upon by the district attorney to do, Kennedy at the time.
Yeah.
And basically he told my father, if you testify against me or against the mafia,
Yes.
you will find your family face down in the East River. So this was a time of great threat. And it's like my legs got pulled out from under me. So the next experience, there was a park across from our apartment, and I would come back from junior high school. I would go home, I would have cookies and milk, and then I would go down and go across the road and climb this tall wrought iron fence and go down the fence to a running track below, a cinder running.
Yeah.
So again, in the session, I can start feeling my feet or my legs as I'm walking. And as I'm walking faster, I feel my legs starting to come back into life, starting to recreate power. And as I start running, I feel the power that was ripped out away from me.
Yes.
Because of the threat.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, okay. So again, these are all important embodied positive experiences. That's
right. Not narrative stories that you're able to tell yourself, but really able to capture and hold on to the sensation of something that happened a long time ago.
That's right. Exactly. To really, to go to the felt experience of it. Body experience. And that was the. But then as we continued, again, building on what I've just described, one time as before, I would go across the road, climb this fence, and climb down, and then go down into the bushes. But as I climbed down, there were they were obviously from a gang, probably the Ford Tigers gang,
Yeah.
and they were smoking cigarettes, and
Yeah.
they were wearing these hats like Marlon Brando was wearing
Mm-hmm.
and all of it, I felt the hair on the back of my neck and my back standing up,
Yes.
like I knew something was wrong and I was in danger,
Yes.
but I didn't know what to do. I looked back at the fence and I realized if I climbed the fence, I would still be an easy target. They could come
Yes.
and put me down.
Yeah.
So I thought to run down into the bushes to
Mm-hmm.
get to the running track below because I would be exposed to other people and
Mm-hmm.
I would probably be safe.
Right.
But as I went down, and I'm not going to tell the whole story,
Right.
but I was grabbed from behind, thrown to the ground, and violently assaulted and raped.
Yeah. Yes.
And this was, I'm sure, to tell my parents what happened so they would be even more intimidated.
Of course.
But I didn't tell them.
Mm.
I didn't tell them, and I didn't tell me. I kept it
Yes.
all for a secret. So it was put away in this compartment.
Yeah.
And there it stayed until I was guided with my student
Mm-hmm.
to
Yeah.
excavate this, to heal it,
Yeah.
and to put it in the past where it belonged.
Right. Right.
And
That you
so,
needed that moment when it was safe enough to do that.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And part of what I'm hearing as you share those really vulnerable moments,
Yeah,
and both the moments of violence and violation, but also the vulnerable moments of joy and being moved by the care and the love that your parents were
right.
showing you by setting up that train set,
Exactly.
both
Exactly.
they're
Yeah, yeah.
both tender, very, very tender
Very
moments.
tender. And
Yeah.
I didn't have the words for it at the time, of course. In that moment, I felt that I was cared for, that I
Yes.
was loved.
Yes.
And one of the things that I think we know
Hmm.
about trauma is that if the person has at even one time in their life when they were cared for,
Yes.
when they were loved,
Yeah.
that you know that they're going to be okay,
Yes.
and they have
Yeah.
that foundation to stand on.
There's that proof in their own bodies that that's
Mhm.
possible.
That's right. Exactly. And it's a truth, and it's
Yes.
experienced as a truth. And it's
Yes.
anything anybody can take away
Right.
because it's yours forever.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I were going to sort of loop back to that question that I asked about what would you want your students to say that they'd learned from you? Is that part of what you might,
Mhm.
if you could hear someone, a student of yours, and there are hundreds and thousands of them by now, but if you
Right.
could hear someone say something about what they learned from you that would warm your heart, that would make you feel, yes,
Okay. Um, well, let's try this one and see what comes next.
sure,
That trauma is a fact of life,
yes.
and trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
I think that's one thing I would like my students
yeah.
and everybody really to
Hmm.
know.
Yeah,
The other thing is that with the right guidance, we can deal with some of the most horrific events in our lives
hmm,
and we'll come through it.
yes,
We can heal. I
it's
guess
possible.
it's possible, it's doable.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, doable.
yeah,
And to learn to trust. And again, to come back to Chiron,
mm,
I would want them all to know that they have to do their own work in order to be there for others.
yeah,
And one of the things that that I want them to know, and again, this was in writing the book, writing the
yes,
autobiography, is that we all of us, have stories to tell. And these
Mhm.
stories are all invaluable. And there is no story that's better or worse than any other story.
Mhm.
And I really would hope, that's one of the things I say in the book, is please, if you are touched by what I'm writing,
Yeah.
use that to motivate yourself to write your own story, your own story.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That and that those moments of recognizing where you got inspiration and where you got nurturance and also what you overcame, that those stories are possible for them as well.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think again, we have this deeply rooted instinct,
Hmm.
and it's an instinct to heal, an instinct to move towards wholeness.
Yes.
I think Jung talked about that in different ways.
Yes.
And that's- and our job as therapists is not to resolve the person's trauma, is not to take the trauma away. It's really, really about coming to, what's the word I want to say? In coming to what seemed impossible,
Mhm.
to find out that is more than possible. That this
Yeah.
instinct to heal, when we can help somebody elicit that,
Yes.
that will take them to their healing. Not
Yeah.
remembering a trauma, not talking about the trauma per se, although sometimes, I mean, a narrative can be important, a
Hmm.
coherent narrative. Again, that was one
Yeah.
of the reasons for writing the book, is to try to find that narrative for my
Right.
life.
Right.
But
Your own coherent narrative.
yes, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it's something that, is there, that's there for the asking. I guess I would like
Hmm.
people to know,
Yes.
that it's there, that it can be contacted, and
Hmm.
that it has its own wisdom
Yeah.
and takes us. You know, this kind of reminds me a little bit of another chapter in the book,
Hmm.
and it's called, uh, what is it called? Me and Albert at the Beggar's Banquet.
Hmm.
And in Berkeley, my favorite restaurant on San Pablo Avenue was called the
Hmm.
Beggar's Banquet.
Yeah.
And so after a long day of, teaching and working on my doctoral dissertation and trying to teach somatic experiencing to a group
Hmm.
of Berkeley therapists, I was really happy to be there. And the waitresses really greeted me by name
Yeah.
and very warm. And they would,
Hmm.
put me at my favorite table
Yeah.
with two
Yeah.
with two chairs. And I was almost always would start with a warm bowl of soup.
Hmm.
Soup came with these wonderful pieces of French bread,
Yeah.
crispy on the outside, moist and soft on the inside.
Yeah. Yeah.
And thence of the day kind of receded
Yeah.
as I enjoyed partaking in that meal.
Hmm.
But one day I was sitting there and a shadow came off to my left.
Hmm.
And I looked, and it was a man with crazy wild hair
Yes.
and wearing a sports jacket, a crumpled sports jacket, was 2 sizes, 3 sizes too big for him.
Yeah.
And in this image, he points to the chair at the other side of the table.
Hmm.
So he was, I presumed, asking if he could sit.
Yeah.
I said yes. And this man sat, and I realized, my God, this is
Hmm.
Albert Einstein.
Hmm.
Now, again, remember, I'm a scientist. I know
Right.
Albert Einstein, he's already died anyhow. I know
Yes.
he's not really there,
Of
that it's
course.
my imagination.
Yeah.
But wait a minute, imagination. Jung also talked about what he called active imagination.
Exactly. Right. One of the foundations of his work.
It truly is, and it's really the bridging between unconscious and conscious processing.
Yes.
And well, I did a little research about it, and it says that active imagination is something that children do routinely, but adults don't do at all. And I thought that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Right.
Because
Right about the
the
same time we
adults,
stopped playing. Right?
yes, I think so. I think
Yes.
so. Yeah. Sometimes when I'm working with somebody, I ask them the question, when did your childhood end?
Yeah.
Usually that opens something very, very vital and important. Anyhow, these conversations went on for a period of a year, at least a year. And I would ask him questions,
Yeah.
and he would ask me questions about my questions.
Yes.
This was the method of Socrates, the Socratic inquiry.
Yeah.
So you don't get an answer, you get another question.
Of course.
And so this went on for a good part of a year. And finally, at the end, I was realizing that things that impacted people didn't necessarily only occur in their lifetime, but in the lifetime of their parents, their grandparents, great grandparents,
Yes.
and all the way to all of the ancestors.
Yes.
And
Intergenerational.
yes. And so I asked Einstein about this. I was explaining that I was now learning that in many of my clients that this was something that was happening routinely. And usually instead of I asked the question, then he'd ask the question about my question. This was a different time. So kind of like a dream within the active imagination dream.
Yes.
He takes me to a pond and he has a yardstick, a meter stick, and along the stick are small stones. And so he takes me to this pond and he holds the stick over the pond and then twist it, and all of the stones come down into the water, and you see waves going out coherently in all directions, not just ahead in time, but to the side in time, going backwards in time. And of course, this is something that Einstein knew very well, that time and space and time were a fabric. They were a linear thing at all.
Right.
So anyhow, I then asked him, I said, well, how would I work with this? And he looked at me compassionately with a tear forming in his eye.
Yeah.
And he said, Peter, I don't have that answer, but you do, and you will find that answer. And so I leave you. And that was the last time I had these encounters, these imaginary encounters with the professor.
Yeah.
35 years ago, I was visiting my parents in New York. And I was going to museums downtown, and I was coming home at the end of the day, taking the D train, getting off at 205th Street, going up the hill, coming into the apartment. Both of my parents were sitting on a couch on a sofa. That above them was a bookshelf.
Yes.
And one of the books on the bookshelf, which caught my eye immediately, was Einstein's theory of relativity. So that prompted me to tell my parents, particularly my mother, about the imaginary encounters I had with Einstein, and who could be incredibly intuitive. And it's a gift. I thank her for giving me.
Yeah.
Said, Peter, that was not in your imagination. That really happened. What is she saying?
Right. What do you mean that my imaginary conversations were real? I just got them sorted out in my own understanding of what was happening to me.
Finally, exactly.
Yeah.
And she said, when I was pregnant with you, you were 8 months in utero. Your father and I were on this lake in a canoe,
Yes.
And a strong wind came and tipped the canoe over, and they were unable to right the canoe,
Yes.
and they would have surely perished. And I wouldn't be talking with you today, Ray, because I wouldn't be here.
Oh.
And so as they struggled, a small sailboat came along, and they grabbed my parents into the boat, gave them towels to dry off, and introduced themselves
Yes.
as Albert Einstein and his stepdaughter.
Yes. Wow.
My mother reasoned, and this was her intuition, that in that moment, because Einstein literally saved my life, that I would be forever wedded to him as
Yes.
a mentor.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, my life did not go in a straight line. It went in many different loops and thing like that. And again, I think that's one of the things I try to convey in the autobiography, is how I really went not just from A to B to C to D. My friend Ian once said, the shortest distance between 2 points is not necessarily a straight line. And the arc of my life has been that all of those curves within curves within curves within curves.
Right. Those intersecting ripples and the
Yes,
moments of resonance that
that's
appear
exactly.
within those ripples and where they intersect and what they
Exactly.
touch.
And he showed me that if some of these ripples go by, and if the two of them get stuck, somehow
Yes.
then everything becomes distorted after that, ahead, forward in time, backwards in time, side and side.
Yeah.
And so again, that was sort of what again helped me developing and work with people who have had not only generational trauma, ancestral trauma, but
Yes.
ancestral wisdom
Of
as
course.
well. And this
Right.
was in way even more important. Well, as in somatic experiencing, it's more
Absolutely.
important. To,
Right. Right. That the most important thing in many ways is to restore the faith that expansion and resolution and healing and growth, that's possible.
yeah.
That unfreezes the stuck
Yeah.
ripples that happen in
And
those
that can happen.
intersections.
And that's all you have to do. You just
Mhm.
where it's stuck, you somehow open it, and then it continues coherently moving in all directions in time and space.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. We didn't have time to get to this, Peter, but that beautifully answers another question that I had about your experience of the intersection between shamanism and science, because you are sort of in many ways uniquely positioned
Yes.
at one of those intersections where you've actually found the points in common. And I won't ask, but I'll just say, maybe to wrap this up,
Yeah.
how beautifully quantum theory is now being applied to things like biology, and how
Yes.
we're understanding how
Yeah.
this works in a much more nuanced and sophisticated and
Right.
mysterious way.
Yeah. And maybe even also a uniting of relativity and quantum mechanics.
Yes, exactly.
The question that you just asked me, this is one of these people who've endorsed. Oh, I was really so moved by the people who wrote endorsements for the book. Really,
Yes. Yeah.
that was one of the things that allowed me to talk about it, feeling their support. Anyhow,
Yes.
this is from a man named Joachim Bauer. He's a professor of medicine and neuroscience at the University of Freiburg and the
Yes.
International Psychoanalytic University in Berlin.
Okay.
Love
Yeah.
him here. And he wrote this basically 2 sentences.
Yeah.
An inspiring journey of trauma and triumph, a uniting of science and shamanism in transforming trauma and restoring wholeness.
Yeah. There it is, right
So
there.
thank you, Joachim.
Yes. And thank you, Peter. I want to make sure that we've got a little bit of time to
Yeah.
take some questions from
Yes.
all the folks who are joining us
Yeah, I'll take some
on this
questions.
Zoom call. Are you ready for that, to make that transition?
I'm ready.
All right, great. Well, so I have a couple of questions here. One question from someone joining us named Kelly Floss. They're wondering if you could speak, Peter, about the power of bravery when it comes to processing trauma and
Oh,
telling the stories that we need to tell.
yeah. Wow. Yeah, thanks for asking that question. For me in my life,
Yeah.
It was courage and persistence,
Mm-hmm.
and to be guided by both of those.
Right.
Yeah, perseverance and courage.
Just carrying on, keeping on, keeping on.
Perseverance furthers, and you keeping on, keeping on, keeping on. You don't give up. The Dalai Lama said it, don't give up, never give up, don't give up. Find it in your heart, don't give up.
Thank you. Kelly also wonders, and maybe you have some insight on this. They ask, how can we encourage our clients, our friends, our family members, just the people in our lives, to be more brave when it comes to processing trauma and telling the stories that we need to tell?
Well, I think to acknowledge it when they are brave.
Right.
I can tell, I can see it really took a lot of courage for you to do this, that, you know. No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. So find those moments
to validate
when those moments happen, when the courage happens, even in those small ways.
Yes, even in small ways. Yes.
Yeah.
Because when you add up all the small ways, you get some awfully big, wonderful way, encompassing ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you. There's a question here from Bradley. They write, my wife and I have a baby on the way. And Bradley's reflecting on your somatic memories and their own. And they're moved to ask, what can we do now and postpartum to help our baby feel safe and feel joy and develop resilience?
My gosh. Yeah, yeah. You know, my dear friend Maggie Klein, she and I wrote 2 books about working with children. One is more for professionals. It's called Trauma Through a Child's Eyes.
Yeah.
And the other one is called Trauma Proofing Your Kids, a parent's guide for instilling confidence, joy, and resilience. And it starts from intrauterine to birth and all the way into toddlerhood and childhood.
Right.
And I recommend the book. It's a lot of valuable information in it.
Wonderful. That sounds great.
Exercises and things you can do with drawing with children.
Great. There's a question here from Stephanie, and they're wondering, how are our emotions and instincts distinct from our sense of self or our sense of intelligence?
I don't think they are distinct from. Well, I mean, you know, we are spiritual beings, we are knowing beings. And we're spiritual beings.
Yes.
In a living body. And I think more than anything, to help people contact their own life force, their own life energy.
Yeah.
And sometimes people will ask, well, how do you know if the somatic experiencing session has gone well?
Yeah.
Like that. And I think, well, if the person feels more vital, more alive, then you know that's how you did the right thing.
Right. And I guess also I'm hearing in that question from Stephanie that, and in your response when you said, I don't know that there is much of a difference. It's reminding me of what we talked about earlier in this conversation, that in many ways the exploration of being more fully somatic is to find ways of embracing and being willing to explore all of those things as different facets of that self that we are.
Yeah, yeah. Well, again, it's to be embodied. And you know, it took us quite some time to get disembodied. So we also need to have patience to become embodied again. That is our natural state.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about how Thomas Hanna, who coined the term that we're using, right? And who was an exceptional philosopher, an exceptional phenomenologist, existential phenomenologist in his own right. How he really described somatics as not just what we feel in our own bodies and not reduced to sensations or emotions or instincts, but that a somatic perspective included our intelligence, included our sense of self, included our relationality, included our environment, and that being able to navigate and include all of those dimensions of experience. That's what was that was somatic.
Yeah. Of course, I agree. And he left this world too early, sadly.
Yes.
He was such an important person. And also his wife,
Eleanor. Yes.
Eleanor,
Who's still working.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
Yes, absolutely. Does fabulous work with horses.
Oh yeah. A lot of my students also do offer equine therapy now. I probably about 25 of my students also work with horses. Yeah.
It makes sense to me
Oh yeah.
that beings with such attuned sensitivities
Right.
and intelligence, but without language or without the kind of language that we're used to communicating with, that there's a way in which we have to return to our somatic sensibilities.
Right. And because, I mean, these are mammals that are fully, totally embodied.
Exactly.
And they know when you're not embodied. They'll be
know when you're
patient
not.
often, and they'll wait there for you. Yeah. One of the Marines that I worked with, he was talking about his experience. He was working with also doing some equine work, and he was saying, you have these enormous animals, and for them to be calm, you have to be calm. And the opposite is also true, of course.
And what for those listening in on the call and joining us today who are practitioners and who are maybe curious about how do I be that embodied presence for the people that I'm working with? How important is that for you in terms of understanding your work and what works?
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely.
Right. That
It's
in a way we're the horse.
We are exactly.
We're the horse. We're the ones waiting patiently.
Yes, Chiron, the man and animal is one. So listen, I'm going to have to sign off here. It's late. I'm jet lagged and I have teaching all day tomorrow.
Yes, I understand, and we are exactly at time. So thank you so much for hanging in there, particularly given how late it is where you are. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and for having this wonderful conversation.
And to all my CIIS friends, because I taught there for a number of years with Don Johnson.
Yes.
And actually,
I still teach with Don.
Oh, do you? Because I wrote an endorsement for the book that his wife just wrote.
Yes.
Very nice book, wonderful book. Okay, all right.
Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this with this conversation.
And remember, you all have your stories to tell.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. Thanks, everyone else, and have a great day.
Okay.